The blind Omega was banished for being cursed, until the Alpha King's heir called her Mother. The wind whispered through the blackened trees of Mistvale Forest, carrying with it the sorrow of lost souls and the faint, mournful cries of creatures unseen. In the heart of this forest, where the sunlight barely touched the ground and shadows clung to every branch, lived a girl the villagers of Valdian had called Cursed. Her name was Ilara, and though she could not see, her world was vivid in ways others could never understand. She felt the forest around her, the pulse of life beneath her bare feet, the shiver of branches above, the rhythm of birds and beasts hidden in the gloom. Ilara had been born an Omega, weaker in body than others of her kind, yet gifted in a way that frightened those who valued strength above all else. From the moment she opened her eyes, she had known nothing but darkness, and the villagers whispered that the darkness had marked her. Some said her blindness was a curse from the old gods, others claimed misfortune followed her wherever she went. When she had cried as an infant, her tears were called tears of doom. When the river near her village had flooded, people said it was her presence that stirred the waters. And when the crops withered in the summer heat, they whispered that she had brought their suffering. By the time Ilara was 16, the whispers had become demands. The Council of Elders, those who ruled with a careful hand over Valdian, gathered to decide her fate. They said she was dangerous, that her touch might bring ruin, that even the air she breathed was a threat to their fragile peace. And so, in a cold ceremony beneath the waning moon, they banished her to the Mistvale Forest. She remembered the day well, the scent of wet stone, the sharp wind biting her cheeks, and the murmurs of the villagers as they watched her leave. She did not cry, there was nothing left to cry for. Instead, she had taken only what she could carry in her small hands, a bundle of clothes, a knife her father had given her before he died, and a small, carved wooden charm she had always worn. It was said to ward off evil, though Ilara was never certain what evil truly was. The forest did not welcome her with open arms. Mist curled around her ankles like ghostly fingers, and the trees leaned over her as if to watch her struggle. Animals shrank into the shadows at her approach, and every step she took seemed heavier than the last. Yet despite the fear that surrounded her, Ilara felt a strange comfort here. In the village, she had been feared and despised. In the forest, no one cared who she was. She made her home in a small, abandoned cabin that stood at the edge of a clearing. Its roof sagged and the walls were covered in moss, but it was dry, and it offered some protection from the cold, endless nights. There, she learned to survive. She gathered berries and roots, learned the habits of the forest creatures, and made a life out of necessity. Her senses grew sharper in the absence of sight. She could hear a fox padding through the underbrush long before it appeared. She could smell the rain before the clouds broke over the forest. She could even feel the mood of the wind, knowing when it carried danger or promise. Yet loneliness was her constant companion. She had no one to speak to, no one to share the small triumphs of finding food or staying warm. At night, when the wind moaned and the shadows stretched across her cabin walls, she thought of the village she had left behind. She wondered if they were happier without her, or if the fear they had felt at her presence haunted them still. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of crimson and violet, Ilara heard something unusual. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, and careful, unlike the scuttling of forest animals. Her hand tightened around the wooden charm she always carried. The air grew colder, the mist thicker, and the hairs on her arms stood on end. She could feel someone coming before they even appeared, a presence that carried both fear and desperation. When the figure finally emerged from the trees, Ilara realized with a shock that it was not an animal, nor a spirit, but a human, a young man, no older than 17 or 18. His clothes were torn, his skin smeared with blood, and his chest heaved with exhaustion. And yet the moment he saw her, his eyes lit with recognition, even in the dim light. "Mother," he whispered, his voice cracking. Elara froze. The word hung in the air like a fragile glass bell, trembling and impossible. Mother. She had never been anyone's mother. She had been alone for so long, and now this boy called her that. Her heart, which she had thought was a cold, steady stone, leapt painfully in her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. The boy staggered closer, collapsing at her feet. "Kale," he said, pressing a hand to his side where blood seeped through his tunic. You are my mother." Elara knelt beside him, careful and gentle. Her hands glided over his face and shoulders, feeling the warmth, the pulse of life, the rapid beating of his heart. Every instinct in her screamed that she should protect him, though she did not understand why. "Your mother?" she asked again, uncertain. I am no one's mother." "You are mine," Kale said, his voice weak but insistent. "I don't know why, but the others, they called you cursed, and yet," he coughed, and a shiver passed through him. "You are the only one who can save me." Elara's mind raced. Save him from what? From whom? She had known exile and danger, but never this. Never a child calling her mother in the middle of a forest where shadows moved and whispered secrets only she could hear. Yet something in his presence made her feel both needed and terrified. The truth was simple: she could not leave him. Not here, not now. Night fell, thick and suffocating. Elara tended to Kale as best she could, using herbs she had gathered and the little knowledge of healing she possessed. She whispered words of comfort, even though she doubted they reached him. The forest, usually alive with the sound of wind and creatures, was eerily silent, as if it too waited to see what she would do. As hours passed, Kale grew weaker and the danger of his condition became clear. He was not just lost. He had been running from something, hunted perhaps, though she did not yet know what. The words he spoke between shallow breaths hinted at enemies in the court, assassins, and secrets that bound him to the kingdom she had once fled. Elara felt a surge of emotion she had never experienced before: fear for someone else's life, an aching desire to protect, and a dawning understanding that this boy, this Kale, was now a part of her fate. She would not allow him to perish in her cabin among the shadows. As midnight approached, the wind rose, carrying a faint, chilling whisper. Elara's ears twitched. She was not alone. Something else stirred in the forest, something that had been waiting for her arrival, or perhaps for Kale's. The shadows stretched toward the cabin as if testing her resolve, probing the fragile barrier of warmth and light she had built. Kale, sensing the tension, reached a trembling hand toward her. "Mother," he murmured again, "I can feel it. They are coming. You must help me." Elara's chest tightened. Help him? She did not know how, but she knew one thing: she could not turn away. Not now, not ever. She rose, letting the darkness swirl around her like a cloak. Her heart pounded in her chest, a rhythm that seemed to guide the shadows themselves. For the first time since her exile, she felt power, not in strength of body, but in the knowledge that she could protect, that she could confront what came next. She did not yet understand the curse the village had whispered about, but she felt it awaken inside her, a faint hum of energy, of life and shadow intertwined. The footsteps grew louder outside the cabin, heavy, deliberate, carrying with them a weight of intent and menace. Elara stepped forward, placing herself between Kale and the door. "Who's there?" she called, her voice stronger than she expected. No answer came, only the sound of the mist shifting, the low growl of something that was neither beast nor man. The shadows pressed closer as though testing her resolve, whispering her name in voices that sounded like the rustle of dead leaves. Kale clutched her arm, his fear and trust both tangible. "Mother, please," he whispered. Elara's gaze, though blind, pierced the darkness. She felt the shapes of those who approached, the intent behind their steps, and the weight of the choice she had to make. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about destiny, and in that moment she made her decision. She would not let the boy die. She would face whatever came, embrace whatever power stirred within her, and protect him with all that she had, even if it meant confronting the curse the village had feared for so long. The cabin door shook under the force of the first strike from outside. Alara's hand went to the wooden charm at her chest, and she whispered a word of protection, though she did not know if it would work. Shadows twisted and bent toward her command, responding to her will as if recognizing the truth of her strength. Kale's eyes widened in awe and a faint smile touched his lips. "Mother," he whispered again, this time with hope, not fear. And then the darkness broke open. The night air in Mistvale Forest was thick with mist and the smell of rain-damp earth. Shadows seemed to lean closer, as though curious about the two figures huddled in the small, weathered cabin. Alara's heart still thumped from the encounter with the unknown force outside. Whatever had tested her at the cabin door had vanished, retreating into the darkness, but the echo of its presence lingered like a cold breath on her skin. Kale, the boy who had called her mother, lay on a bed of folded blankets in the corner, pale but breathing steadily. Every rise and fall of his chest reminded Alara of the fragility of life, of the responsibility now tied to her. She had never imagined herself in this position, not a mother, not a guardian, not a protector of a child of royal blood. And yet here he was, looking at her with eyes that held trust deeper than any words could express. "You are not just anyone," Kale whispered, his voice weak but urgent. I am the heir to the throne of Valdian." Alara froze, a bundle of blankets clutched in her hands. She had heard of the Alpha King, the ruler of Valdian, whose power was said to be unmatched. Tales of the royal line had always seemed distant, untouchable, the stories of kings and heirs belonging to a world she had been banished from. And now the boy lying before her claimed he was the heir, heir to a throne that had never welcomed her. You are the heir?" she asked carefully, unsure whether she should feel awe, fear, or anger. "Yes," Kale said, his lips trembling. "I am Kale, son of King Darius. My mother, his voice faltered. "She is gone, and they said you were cursed, that you would bring ruin. Yet when I ran, I could feel you guiding me, protecting me even before I knew it." Alara's chest tightened. The boy spoke as though he had known her all his life, and yet she barely knew him. The forest had been her only companion, her only teacher, and now she was thrust into a world of royal bloodlines, palace intrigues, and destinies far larger than herself. "Kale," she said softly, sitting beside him, "I am no one's mother. I have only survived this forest. I do not know how to protect you from what you do not see." Kale's small hand reached for hers, clutching it with surprising strength. "Mother," he said again, and this time there was no hesitation in his voice. "I don't care what others think. You saved me. You are the only one who can keep me alive. I trust you more than anyone." Her heart ached with a mixture of fear and longing. She had never felt needed before, never felt the weight of someone depending on her life. And yet, she realized, the moment she touched his hand, that she would not let him fall, not to the darkness of the forest, nor the darkness of the world beyond. The first light of dawn began to creep into the cabin, painting the mist outside in pale gold. Alara rose to gather more wood for the fire, her senses alert. The forest had not been kind, and she had learned to trust the warnings carried by the wind and the movement of animals. There was still danger lurking, assassins, shadows, or worse, but now she had a purpose, to guide Kale back to the kingdom safely, to the throne that was his by birthright. Days passed in a quiet rhythm. Alara taught Kale the ways of the forest, showing him which plants could be eaten, which herbs could heal, and how to move silently through the underbrush. Kale learned quickly, though he was far more accustomed to the comforts of palace life than the harsh lessons of survival. He stumbled, fell, and cursed softly under his breath, but he never gave up. Each time he faltered, Alara's heart tightened, and she found herself offering more guidance than she had intended. Despite her initial resistance, Alara began to notice something unexpected. Kale was clever, resourceful, and curious. He asked questions about the forest, about the animals, about the shadows that moved unseen. And when he touched the trees or felt the mist on his face, there was a spark of wonder in his eyes, a spark that reminded her that the world was not always cruel. One afternoon, as they rested by a small stream, Kale spoke again of the palace. "They are looking for me," he said quietly, skipping a stone across the water. "My father's advisors, some of them want me gone. They see me as a threat, not an heir. And now I am weak, alone. You are my only family." Alara's fingers tightened around a smooth stone in her hand. She had left Valdian to escape fear and suspicion, yet here she was, drawn back into the currents of a royal destiny she had tried to avoid. "I will not let them harm you," she said firmly. "We will find a way to reach the palace safely." Kale nodded, but his eyes were troubled. "It is not just them," he admitted. "There are forces beyond the palace, old magic, curses, shadows that do not obey men. Some say the forest itself is alive with spirits that can twist your mind, and they say only the cursed can face it and survive." Alara shivered. The forest had been her companion, but Kale's words reminded her that the world beyond was far more dangerous than she had imagined. Yet there was a strange comfort in knowing that her so-called curse might not be a curse at all, but a gift, a power meant to protect those she loved. The journey back to Valdian began at dusk. Alara led Kale through secret paths she had discovered over years of exile, paths where the trees grew thick and the shadows were deep. Each step was careful, measured, as she listened to the whispers of the wind and the faint rustle of creatures that watched from the undergrowth. Kale followed closely, his hand often brushing hers for reassurance. Night fell and the forest grew darker, the mist thickening around them like a living veil. Alara's senses sharpened, guiding them safely through the treacherous terrain. But as they neared a small clearing, a sound stopped her in her tracks, a soft, deliberate footstep, too heavy to be an animal. She froze, pressing a hand against Kale's shoulder. "They are close," she whispered. "Stay behind me." The figure that emerged from the mist was not an animal, nor a wandering traveler. It was a man, dressed in dark leathers, with the insignia of Valdian stitched into his tunic. His eyes were sharp, assessing, and filled with intent. "Alara," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "I've been sent to find the heir. Hand him over and no harm will come to you." Alara stepped forward, her hand moving instinctively toward the wooden charm at her chest. "You will not touch him," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "He is under my protection." The man sneered. "The Omega cursed by the village dares to oppose the king's men. Foolish girl, step aside or I will take him by force." Kale moved instinctively to her side, but Alara placed a hand on his chest, stopping him. "Stay," she said firmly. "This is my fight." The man lunged, and the shadows of the forest seemed to respond to Alara's presence. Leaves twisted in the air, branches bent, and the mist thickened, swirling like smoke around her. She did not understand fully what was happening, only that the forest obeyed her will, forming a barrier between her and the intruder. The man froze, his eyes wide with fear. What are you?" he demanded. "I am not cursed," Alara said, her voice rising with a strange power she had never felt before. "I am the protector of this child. You will not harm him." The shadows deepened, wrapping around the man like living vines. He stumbled back, realizing too late that the power he had underestimated was far greater than he could have imagined. With a final glare, he turned and fled into the mist, leaving them alone once more. Kale stared at her, awe and fear mingling in his eyes. "Mother, you." Alara knelt beside him, her fingers brushing his hair back from his forehead. "Shh," she whispered. "It's all right. I will keep you safe." For the first time since he had arrived in the forest, Kale allowed himself to relax. He leaned against her, drawing warmth and courage from her presence. Alara, too, felt a connection she had never known before. The boy was more than her charge. He was a beacon, a reason to embrace the strength that had lain dormant inside her for so long. As the mist curled around them, the distant lights of Valdian glimmered faintly through the trees. The journey was far from over. The palace awaited, with all its intrigue, danger, and secrets. And yet, for the first time, Alara felt something she had thought impossible: hope. Hope that she could guide the heir safely. Hope that she could face the shadows that had haunted her. And hope that perhaps even a cursed Omega could find her place in a world that had long rejected her. But as they stepped forward, the mist seemed to thicken, and a whisper brushed against Alara's ear, faint but unmistakable. "The darkness knows you have returned. It will follow." Alara's grip tightened on Kale's hand. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. And the forest, once a place of exile, now felt like a first step toward destiny. The journey from the forest toward Valdian was long and uncertain. Mistvale Forest had tested Alara and Kale at every step, yet as the edge of the kingdom drew near, a different tension settled over them. A tension not born of trees or shadows, but of whispers, secrets, and the weight of destiny. Alara felt it first. A subtle tremor in the air, like a warning carried by the wind. Her senses, sharpened by years of exile, noticed the smallest details. A branch bent unnaturally, a rustle of leaves without a cause, the faint shimmer of something unseen moving at the corner of her awareness. Kale, walking beside her, did not notice. His eyes were fixed on the distant walls of the palace, tall and glimmering even in the dim light of dawn. "You feel it too, don't you?" Alara asked quietly, keeping her voice low. Kale glanced at her, frowning. "Feel what?" "The shadows," she said, letting her hand brush over the mist that swirled at their feet. "They are not just in the forest anymore. Something follows us, something that knows you and me." Kale shivered. "The palace?" he asked, though his voice was uncertain. "Or something else?" Alara did not answer. She did not need to. She could feel it, a dark force, ancient and patient, lingering ahead, waiting for them to step closer to the city walls. Whatever it was drawn to the boy's bloodline and her presence. She had always feared her so-called curse, but now it seemed the forest's secrets were only the beginning. By mid-morning, the spires of Valdian rose over the horizon. The city was magnificent, with towers that gleamed like silver in the sun, streets lined with cobblestones, and banners fluttering proudly in the wind. Yet beneath the beauty, Alara sensed a subtle unease, a tension that spoke of secrets, rivalries, and danger hidden behind walls of stone. They approached a quiet gate on the outskirts of the city, hoping to enter unnoticed. But as they neared, the shadows stirred again, and a figure stepped from the mist of the city streets. Unlike the man from the forest, this figure was clothed in fine robes, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Alara," the man said, bowing slightly but with a hint of menace in his tone, "I have been sent by the court. The king's advisors demand that the heir return immediately." Kale stepped forward, trembling. "I am not ready. I—" "Silence," the man snapped, his gaze flicking to Alara. "And you, the cursed Omega, you will not interfere. Step aside." Alara's chest tightened. The forest had prepared her for threats of flesh and claw, but the court demanded obedience in words and authority. She could feel the shadows stirring in her blood, responding to her fear and determination. "I will not step aside," she said firmly. "He is under my protection. Do not test me." The man's expression darkened. "You dare defy the court. You are nothing here, Omega." A shadow that should have remained in exile. Alara felt a heat rise in her chest. It was not anger in the ordinary sense, but a deep, ancient energy that had lain dormant for years. Her so-called curse, whatever it truly was, reacted to the threat, and the air around her seemed to shift. Mist twisted into shapes, shadows bending like liquid toward her will. Kale stared, eyes wide. "Mother, what is happening?" She did not answer. She focused, feeling the power rise from the ground, from the stones beneath her feet, from the life around them. The man took a step back, sensing the force but unable to understand its origin. "You are more than they said," he whispered, fear creeping into his voice. More than a curse. Alara let the shadows recede slightly enough to calm the moment. I am what is needed, she said softly, and I will protect him no matter what. The man hesitated, then bowed abruptly. I will report this, he said, retreating into the city streets. Kale exhaled, relief and awe mingling on his pale face. Mother, your power. Alara knelt beside him. It is not just power, she said. It is a gift. One I did not understand before, but now I do. It is tied to you, to your blood, to the destiny that brought us together. The palace gates rose before them, massive and imposing. Guards in polished armor watched silently as they approached. Alara felt the weight of the city, of the world, pressing down on them. Kale's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and wonder, and she felt a protective surge of emotion. Inside the palace, the air was different. Rich tapestries lined the walls, the scent of incense and candle wax filled the corridors, and servants moved quietly, eyes down, whispering behind their hands. Alara sensed the undercurrent immediately: jealousy, ambition, suspicion. Every noble in Valdian was watching, waiting to see who would rise, who would fall, and what secrets would emerge from the shadows. They were led to a small chamber, away from the main court, where Kale's mother had once stayed before her death. Kale sank into a chair, exhausted, his small frame trembling from the journey. Alara knelt beside him, her fingers brushing over his hair as she whispered reassurance. You are safe now, she said softly, at least for the moment. But safety was fleeting in Valdian. That night, as the city slept under the silver glow of the moon, whispers reached Alara's ears, voices of the court, voices of shadows, voices of spirits long tied to the kingdom's magic. They spoke of prophecy and power, of the cursed Omega and the heir she protected. And they whispered warnings. Alara, beware, one voice said, soft and wind-like. Your gift awakens, but so does the darkness. It watches, it waits. She shivered, pressing her hands together. The forest had prepared her for survival, for fear, but it had not prepared her for the weight of destiny. Kale stirred beside her, sensing her unease. Mother, he asked sleepily, are they going to come for me? They may try, she whispered, but we will face them together. Whatever comes, we are stronger than they expect. The following days were tense. Alara trained Kale in secret, teaching him ways to sense danger, to move quietly, to trust his instincts. At the same time, she discovered more about her own abilities. The shadows responded to her moods, to her intent, and to her need to protect Kale. She could feel whispers of the past, echoes of spirits tied to the royal line, and faint visions that hinted at dangers lurking within the palace itself. Kale grew stronger under her guidance, learning not only survival skills but also courage. He learned that being heir was not just about privilege, but about responsibility, about facing threats that could not always be met with swords or shields. And as they spent long hours together, a bond deeper than trust began to grow, a bond of family, of shared purpose, and of unspoken understanding. But danger was never far. One evening, a royal advisor, a man with cunning eyes and a voice like silk over steel, came to the chamber. Kale, he said smoothly, the king wishes to see you. It is your duty as heir. Kale shook his head. I am not ready. You will go, the advisor said sharply, and you will go alone. Alara stepped forward, feeling the shadows stir at her side. He is not ready, she said firmly, and he will not face the court alone. The advisor's smile was thin, dangerous. Ah, the cursed Omega speaks. You would oppose the kingdom itself. I oppose only those who would harm the boy, Alara replied, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Do not mistake my protection for fear. I will stand against anyone who threatens him. The advisor's eyes narrowed. So be it, he said, turning to leave. But know this, the court does not forgive and it does not forget. Your presence here will be noted, and soon others will come who will test the extent of your abilities. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. She had survived the forest, the shadows, the dangers of exile. But the court of Valdian was a different kind of trial, one of cunning, ambition, and magic that had lain dormant for centuries, and she knew that the awakening of her gift was only the beginning. That night, as she and Kale sat together in the chamber, the wind outside whispered against the palace walls. Shadows danced along the floor, and she could feel them watching, waiting. The gift within her stirred, a silent, powerful energy that both frightened and emboldened her. "Mother," Kale whispered, leaning against her shoulder, "I'm scared." "I know," she said softly, wrapping an arm around him, "but we are together, and together we will face whatever comes." And in the dark corners of the palace, unseen eyes observed them. Old magic, restless and patient, began to move. It recognized the presence of the cursed Omega, the heir she protected, and the destiny that bound them both. The court of Valdian would soon see that exile had not diminished her power. If anything, it had awakened it. And as the night deepened, Alara felt a truth settle in her bones. The curse was no longer just hers to bear. It was a shield, a weapon, and a gift, and it would be tested in ways she could not yet imagine. The shadows shifted, whispering their secrets, and for the first time, Alara understood that the journey to save Kale had only just begun. The moon hung low over Valdian, silver light spilling across the towers of the palace and the quiet streets below. For the first time, Alara walked through the halls of the royal city fully aware of the stakes. The shadows of her exile no longer clung to her, but she felt their echoes within, whispers that reminded her of everything she had endured. Kale walked beside her, taller and steadier than before, yet still with the hesitancy of a boy who had faced more than any child should. His small hand occasionally brushed hers, a silent gesture of trust and unity. Alara felt a warmth she had never known, pride, fear, and hope mingling together, anchoring her resolve. "The court is aware of us now," she said quietly, her voice carrying a calm authority that surprised even her. "They will test you, Kale. Not just with words, but with deeds, decisions, and shadows you cannot yet see." Kale swallowed, nodding. "I'm ready," he said. "I have to be, for the kingdom and for you." Alara looked at him, eyes narrowing despite her blindness. She sensed the doubt and determination in him, the same way she had once felt the pull of the forest shadows. "Then we begin," she said. The palace was a place of endless corridors, hidden chambers, and voices that carried secrets. Advisors whispered behind painted screens, nobles watched from balconies, and servants moved like shadows themselves, wary and curious. Alara felt every movement, every breath, and the tension in the air pressed down like the weight of stone. Their first meeting with the council was tense. Kale stepped forward, and though he was young, his presence demanded attention. Alara stayed behind him, feeling the currents of power and shadow swirl in the room. "Your Highness," one elder said, voice sharp and cautious. "The forest claimed you, yet here you return with—" He paused, eyes narrowing at Alara. "The Omega, they say, is cursed. How can we trust either of you?" Alara's hands rested lightly on Kale's shoulders. "Trust," she said softly, "is earned by actions, not whispers. We come to save what is ours by birthright, and to protect the kingdom from threats both seen and unseen." The council murmured. Their fear of her was visible, yet also a flicker of recognition lingered in their eyes. They had underestimated the strength born from years of exile and hardship. Before the council could respond, the chamber darkened suddenly. Shadows slithered along the walls, curling like smoke around the torches. Whispers, unintelligible but full of malice, filled the room. The elders froze, and Kale's hands trembled at his sides. Alara stepped forward, her fingers brushing the air as if weaving invisible threads. The shadows recoiled, twisting toward her, bending to her will. She did not understand fully what she was doing, only that she could not let them harm Kale or the kingdom. "You see now," she said, voice strong, "that the curse is not a curse. It is a gift, one that protects, guides, and shields." The shadows hissed, writhing, but they did not attack. Alara realized with a thrill that her power was stronger than she had imagined. She could shape it, bend it, and use it to defend those she loved. Kale's eyes shone with awe, and for the first time he seemed truly grown, not a boy, but an heir tempered by trust, courage, and the presence of someone who believed in him unconditionally. But triumph was short-lived. From the darkest corner of the chamber, a figure stepped forward, cloaked in black and moving like a shadow made flesh. The advisor who had once threatened them in the forest appeared, flanked by other nobles who had long coveted Kale's place as heir. "You presume to defy the court," the advisor said, voice like steel over silk. "A cursed Omega and a boy, what nonsense! Do you think the kingdom will bend to your will?" Alara did not flinch. Shadows coiled around her like a living cloak, a protective barrier that hummed with her energy. "I do not bend the kingdom to my will," she said. "I protect what is rightfully his, and I will not allow the shadows to dictate the fate of Valdian." The advisor sneered and raised a hand, calling forth a blade of glimmering steel. "Then you leave me no choice." Kale stepped forward instinctively, but Alara grasped his arm. "Stay," she commanded. "Watch, learn, and trust." The shadows surged at her command, forming shapes that twisted and flowed like living smoke. The nobles gasped as the air thickened with unseen power. The advisor lunged forward, and for a moment, the entire chamber seemed suspended in time. Alara extended her hands, and the shadows responded as extensions of her will. They wrapped around the advisor, not to harm, but to bind him, to restrain his arrogance and malice. He struggled, but the force she wielded was stronger than his sword. "You see now," Alara said, her voice steady, "the curse is no curse. It is the strength of the forest, the spirits, and the truth. I am not your enemy, but I will defend the heir and the kingdom against any who threaten it." Kale stepped closer, his small hands brushing the edge of the shadows. He felt the energy, the power that radiated from Alara, and something deep within him shifted. He understood in that instant that his own destiny was intertwined with hers, and that courage was more than bravery in battle. It was belief, trust, and the willingness to face the darkness without turning away. The advisor collapsed to his knees, humbled and frightened. The other nobles fell silent, realizing that they had underestimated the Omega they had mocked and the boy she protected. Alara's presence, her power, and her unwavering resolve were undeniable. In the days that followed, Alara trained Kale not only in survival, but in leadership. He learned to feel the pulse of the kingdom, to sense danger in whispers, to trust the instincts his mother figure guided him to develop. And she learned more about her own abilities, discovering that the curse, if embraced, could not only protect but also heal, guide, and strengthen those who were pure of heart. The bond between them deepened beyond words. Kale began to call her not only mother but a guide, a mentor, and a source of courage. Alara, in turn, found joy in nurturing, teaching, and sharing her wisdom, realizing that exile had not diminished her spirit, it had honed it. Yet the palace still held shadows that would not rest. Whispers of betrayal and ambition grew louder. Even as the court bowed before the heir and the Omega, old forces stirred, watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. One night, as Alara and Kale stood on the balcony overlooking the city, the moonlight bathing them in silver, Kale asked quietly, "Mother, do you think the shadows will ever leave us?" Alara's hands rested on the balcony rail. "No," she said softly, "and perhaps they should not. Shadows remind us of what we have endured, what we have overcome. They test us, but they also teach us strength. We will face them together, and we will endure because we are stronger than fear itself." Kale leaned against her, trusting her words, her presence, and the power that had awakened within her. For the first time, he felt not like a boy in danger, but like a true heir, guided by someone who believed in him more than he had believed in himself. The dawn rose over Valdian, golden light, spilling across the spires of the palace. Alara and Kale stood together, shadows fading in the light but not gone entirely, reminders of the journey they had survived, the dangers they had faced, and the bond that had been forged through fear, trust, and love. The council gathered once more, this time with quiet reverence. Kale, tall and composed, stood beside Alara as the rightful heir, ready to assume his place, tempered by courage and wisdom. Alara, blind but unafraid, stood as the protector and guardian of the throne, her gift no longer feared but respected. And though the shadows still lingered in the corners of the palace, they were no longer enemies. They were reminders, teachers, and allies, proof that exile had not weakened the Omega but had awakened her true strength. Alara turned to Kale, smiling softly. "Your kingdom is yours now," she said, "and your path will be yours to walk. But remember this, you are never alone. Whatever darkness comes, whatever trials await, we face them together." Kale took her hand in his, a gesture of trust, gratitude, and love that needed no words. "Together," he said, his voice firm. As they looked out over the kingdom, the first rays of sunlight touched the city walls, casting long, golden shadows. The darkness was still there, patient and watchful, but the future was bright. The blind Omega had been redeemed, and the heir had found both courage and family. In the quiet of the morning, Valdian stirred awake, unaware of the invisible battles that had been fought, the curses that had been tamed, and the destiny that had been rewritten. But Alara and Kale knew the truth. Together they had faced the shadows, embraced their power, and forged a bond stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, stronger than exile. The kingdom would remember them, the shadows would respect them, and their story, the story of the blind Omega and the heir who called her mother, would live on, whispered in legends, carried by the wind, and etched into the hearts of those who dared to believe in courage, love, and redemption.